to Jesus for the cleansing power. Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you fully trusting in His grace this hour? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb?
It's a joy and an honor to be here with each and every one of you this morning. Moving is exhausting. Moving with 4 children is even more exhausting. But you as a congregation, as well as our congregation back in Broken Bow, Christians have helped us and have taken maybe a little bit of the exhaustion away. And we are just so thankful to be here. We're thankful to be working with this fine congregation. We're so honored that you have us. And we're just excited to be here together, worshiping the Lord together, starting this morning, and of course, many Sundays on from this. If you look at the Old Testament from the beginning to the end of the Old Testament, you see a vicious cycle that takes place. You'll see, of course, the Lord blessing the people. And shortly after the Lord blesses the people, you'll see the next typical step from the people, and that is they start turning on the Lord. And after they turn on the Lord is going to go and He's going to punish the people. And after the people are punished in some form or fashion, what happens in that fourth part of the cycle, the people come back to the Lord, and the Lord, of course, forgives them. And you see this cycle happen time after time after time in the Old Testament. Think, if you will, all the way back to Adam and Eve. What did Adam and Eve receive from the Lord? They received everything that they could ever want. If you will, they received eternal life. They were not going to die. However, they turned on the Lord. And because they turned on the Lord, they, of course, were kicked out of the Garden of Eden. And, of course, from that point on, their descendants still were blessed by the Lord, even after this terrible punishment. Their descendants were still blessed, and, of course, the Lord is still going to take care of them. I'm mindful, of course, of the children of Israel whenever they're in Egypt. What happened to them? How wonderful did God take care of them? He brought them out, as of course we call it the Exodus. He called them out. He brought them out with the help of Moses out of Egypt with those 10 plagues. He brought them, of course, across the Dead Sea or the Red Sea there. And then He was bringing them to that land of Canaan, that land flowing with milk and honey. It was going to be a wonderful blessing, and He led them close enough that 12 spies could get into that land. And what did the 10 of the 12 spies declare? We can't. We can't get into that land. We can't conquer that land. Have you seen the might of the enemy there in that land? They had forgotten the God who had taken them out of the land of Egypt. They had forgotten what the God of their fathers had done for them in smiting the ruler of the world in Pharaoh. They forgot about this. They turned their back on the Lord, and because of this, God, of course, punish them as, of course, the cycle continues. And they're punished, and they're supposed to be wandering around in the wilderness for 40 years. But eventually, God, of course, brings them back. Whenever they come back to Him, their descendants get to go into that land of Canaan. And again, the cycle continues. If you were to read through the book of Judges, you'll see where this vicious cycle continues. If you were to read through the kings and all the different acts of the kings, you would see that this vicious cycle continues. You, of course, are mindful of the 3 kings. You have, of course, Saul and David and Solomon. And after Saul, David, and Solomon, the nation of Israel, the united nation of Israel, it splits in 2. You have the northern nation of Israel. And now you have the southern nation of Judah. And no longer will they be united because of course, the way that they cannot get along. And those 2 nations go off doing the exact same thing. They go off and they start falling away from the Lord, and they start doing things contrary to the will of God. And God is going to have to punish both of these particular groups separately. Of course, there's the northern nation of Israel, and what happens to them? They start, of course, worshiping other gods, and God, of course, punishes them. And unfortunately for them, the vicious cycle is done, because they get sent off into Assyrian captivity, and they're never going to return back to Israel. It's done. God is not going to forgive them anymore based on their sins. But then, of course, there is the southern nation of Judah. And the southern nation of Judah, they also are going to turn from God, and they're going to start worshiping idols and doing awful things. And God, too, is going to punish them, and He's going to send them off into Babylonian captivity. But God's not done with them yet. God is going to punish them, but God is also going to bless them whenever they start coming back to Him. And Jeremiah, a prophet who lived during that time of the Babylonian captivity, he prophesied in Jeremiah chapter 29 and verse 10, when 70 years have been completed for Babylon, I will visit you and fulfill my good word to you to bring you back to this place. There's a promise from God that, yes, I'm punishing you based on your wickedness, but I promise you this, I'll bring you back. It will take 70 years. This is going to be a long portion of this particular cycle right here of this punishment. But in 70 years, I'm going to bring you back. This particular promise right here, the people around Jeremiah's day, they hated Jeremiah for it. However, the prophets and the other godly individuals who lived throughout the time many years later, they looked at this promise and they were so thankful for it. I'm mindful of the man Daniel in Daniel chapter 9. He's reading through the book of Jeremiah, and he gets to Jeremiah chapter 29 and verse 10, and he starts calculating back because he was one of the first individuals to come into Babylon, and he's counting back and realizing it's been 70 years. God, you promised that you were going to bring us back, and he did. God, of course, brought the people back. We read in Ezra chapter 1 and verse 1 that the Lord stirred up, this would be around the same time of Daniel chapter 9, that the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia. And what takes place in history right here? Cyrus, king of Persia had come in and taken over Babylon. Now they have all of these exiles from Judah. He sends, through a man by the name of Zerubbabel, he sends about 50,000 individuals back to Jerusalem, back to the southern nation of Judah, and there they are allowed to start rebuilding. And what do? They start rebuilding the temple, and it takes them about 20 years to rebuild that temple, but they do it. They go back with Zerubbabel, they rebuild the temple, because whenever Nebuchadnezzar went into Jerusalem, he destroyed Jerusalem. The temple was down, the walls and the gates were burned to the ground. Jerusalem was destroyed, completely and utterly destroyed. But now Zerubbabel goes back. Ezra is going to go back, as we see in the book of Ezra, and the Lord is blessing his children again. But there's a problem. Turn over to Nehemiah chapter 1. There's a problem because we realize as we get to Nehemiah chapter 1 that 90 years, 90, 91, 92, somewhere in that time, around 90 years has taken place from the time that Zerubbabel has gone back into Jerusalem. And now there's a man by the name of Nehemiah about 90 years later, and he's still in Persia. He is a Jew, and he's still in Persia, and he hears some terrible, awful news. Look at chapter 1 and verse 3. Here he has some individuals who have come back from Jerusalem, and they report to him what they have found. Here in chapter 1 and verse 3 of the book of Nehemiah, it says, "They said to me, the remnant there in the province who survived the captivity are in great distress and reproach, and the wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates are burned with fire." Here's the problem. God has blessed the people. God has sent the people back into Jerusalem. They have indeed done good in rebuilding that temple. It took them 20 years to do so. But now it has been 90 years, and Nehemiah is hearing word, you haven't rebuilt the wall? Do we understand the significance of this particular problem? Back in ancient times, if you had a city, you needed a wall. If you didn't have a wall, you were very, very vulnerable. Enemies could come in and they could attack. They could, of course, kill you. And we have the temple of God, the house of God, here in this particular city. There needed to be a wall, but there was no wall. Look at the response of Nehemiah in verse 4. "When I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days, and I was fasting and praying before the God of heaven." We see here in the book of Nehemiah, and this is what I encourage you to do over the next week. Read the book of Nehemiah, because on Sunday mornings in the month of August, we're going to be pulling lessons out of Nehemiah. So I encourage you to go home and to read Nehemiah yourself. But what we're going to see right here is that here's this man Nehemiah, and he's so distressed, and yet he goes and he takes action. because of how distressed he is, because there is work to be done, and he is not going to just let it slide by. He is going to do it. So he goes and he gets permission, thanks to the will of God, something that we are going to discuss in good detail next week. But he, thanks to the will of God, goes and gets permission from the king, and he takes a paperwork saying, I'm allowed to come here to Jerusalem. He brings, of course, labor, he brings people, he brings supplies, and he goes and he investigates the wall for 3 days, and then he rallies the troops, if you will. Go over to chapter 2 and verse 17. Chapter 2 and verse 17 says, Then I said to them, You see the bad situation we are in, that Jerusalem is desolate and its gates burned by fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem so that we will no longer be a reproach. There's a problem, people. The wall is down. We need to build it back up. And guess what the people showed? I believe the people showed a zeal. They were zealous for the work, and they decided to go along with Nehemiah and the work. Look at verse 18. Verse 18 says, I told them how the hand of my God had been favorable to me, and also about the king's words, which he had spoken to me. Then they said, Let us arise and build. So they put their hands to the good work. Go over to chapter 4 and verse 6. It says, So we built the wall, and the whole wall was joined together to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. They were zealous for the good work that needed to take place. What did this zeal accomplish? Go over to chapter 6 and verse 15. Chapter 6 and verse 15 tells us exactly what this zeal accomplished. It says, So the wall was completed on the 25th of the month Elul in 52 days. Are you kidding me? What the people could not do, or what the people decided not to do in 90 years, Nehemiah and the men there of Jerusalem, and women, as we will see, individuals there in and around Jerusalem, accomplished building the wall in less than 2 months. That's some zeal, and they were zealous right there for the work. Now, as you and I are trying to maybe make some application for this, for you and I this morning, it's true, very, very true, that you and I are not in the wall building business, are we? We're not in the business of building walls. What is a wall for? A wall is to keep people out, and that's exactly what Jerusalem needed. They needed people, of course, to stay out so that they were safe, so that the temple of God was indeed safe. But we know that this is okay to do. This is okay for them to do. It was for the welfare of the people, as chapter 2 and verse 10 would indicate. But you and I are in a different business, aren't we? We're not in the business of building walls to keep people out. Instead, we're in the business of trying to bring people in to the new city, to the new spiritual city of Jerusalem. So we don't need to be going out and building any walls right now. But can we still build? I believe we can. I believe you and I can still be builders, but instead of building walls, let's build bridges together. Let's build bridges, because what have people done based on their sin? People have built, if you will, moats around themselves, moats that are filled up with their own sin. And you and I both have done this in our lives as well. But because of these moats of sin, we can't get to Jesus Christ. Jesus has done everything for us. Jesus has paid the price. Jesus, of course, paid it all. But you and I need to help them find Jesus Christ. What did Paul say in Romans chapter 10 and verse 14? How will they call on him in whom they have not believed? How will they believe in him whom they have not heard? And how will they hear without a preacher? Now, I don't think I, as the pulpit preacher, the Pope is the only preacher that Paul is talking about right here. I don't think that you have to be a paid preacher, or this to be your profession, to be an individual who goes out and preaches the word. We all here at Westhill can absolutely be individuals who are going out and preaching the word. We all need to be those who are building bridges to those who need Jesus Christ. What did Jesus tell his apostles as he was getting ready to ascend into heaven? In Acts chapter 1 and verse 8, he told them that you are going to be my witnesses, both first in Jerusalem, and then in Judea, and then Samaria, and then the remotest parts of the world. Let's translate that down for you and I, because I think we can follow this particular business plan, if you will. You and I need to be starting here and really working hard at being, if you will, witnesses, or being preachers, according to Romans chapter 10, verse 14. to Corsicana. And then from there, of course, we can spread out to Texas. And from there, we can spread out to the rest of the United States. And from there, we can spread out to the rest of the world. We need to not sit still. We need to be zealous for the work. We need to be building bridges for those who are lost. You have children in your home? You have grandchildren in your home, or you have grandchildren that you are close to? What about them? You need to be building bridges for them. Yes, they're innocent. Yes, of course, they are indeed individuals who are still growing old, but you need to be at this time teaching them, building bridges for them, giving them knowledge, if you will, so that they know before they go to college what they believe and why they believe what they believe. You have brothers and sisters in Christ sitting to each side of you. We can build bridges for one another as well. We can encourage one another. We can help one another get to heaven. What do we do in building bridges? We build bridges by first working on the relationship, don't we? The first part of the building project, I work on my relationship with you. I can't help you if I don't know you. You won't trust me if you don't know that I love and care and have concern for your soul. I need to, of course, build that bridge of relationship, and this goes hand in hand with what we need to be doing, not only here in Corsicana, but also, of course, the rest of the world. From there, once you have built that relationship, the next part of the bridge building process is building knowledge. Now it's saying, I love you, I have concern for you. Now let me teach you about someone else who has more concern for you than even I have, and his name is Jesus Christ, and let's see exactly what he has done for you and me. Now, a thought to keep in mind, and I'm really preaching to myself right here. The time process, if you will, from the time that you are making those relationships to the time that you are actually teaching the knowledge, it doesn't have to be a year. It doesn't have to be 5 years. It doesn't even have to be a month. You need to be working on the relationship, and then you need to be working, of course, on building that knowledge for the people, but they can go hand in hand, can't they? What did Philip do with the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts chapter 8? He went, he saw him, he saw that he was reading Isaiah, and he asked the question, do you understand what you're reading? And he started showing concern for him, and then he preached Jesus to him. We could be preaching, we can be building that knowledge, we can be building that relationship hand in hand if we need to. But that final part, if you will, about bridges and building bridges, we build upon their obedience. We show them that we care. We show them that Jesus cares, and then we push them and say, now you need to prove that you care about Jesus Christ as well. What did Jesus say? If you love me, you will keep my commandments. So now this is what Jesus has done for you, and now this is what, according to the Scriptures, you have to do in order to be obedient to Jesus Christ. We need to be doing all of this. This is a part of the work. And I'm asking you this morning, are you zealous for the work? Are you zealous for the work that needs to be done? I want to commend this wonderful congregation. Paul said it just a little while ago. Whenever he came up, and I've never heard another congregation phrase it in this way before, and I absolutely love it. Typically, whenever an individual moves into town or someone says, we want to be a part of this congregation, you hear this particular phrase. So-and-so has decided to place their membership with this congregation. I love what this congregation does. You don't say that, do you? You say so-and-so wishes to place their workmanship with this congregation. Because that's what this is, right? We are working, and I am so thankful, and Andrea and I are so grateful that we are coming into a congregation, and as I'm looking at this congregation, I see a congregation with an eldership that is zealous for the work. And I see a ministry team that is already put in place before I get here, that is zealous for the work. And I see deacons who are zealous for the work. And I see Bible class teachers who are zealous for the work. And I see members who are zealous for the work. And we are so excited that we get to place our workmanship with you here at Westhill. We have so much work to do. And as, of course, we look at Nehemiah over the next several weeks, I want you to keep this in mind. If the book of Nehemiah can teach you and I anything, I believe it can teach us that if the people of God, the children of God, work together according to His will, which again we will discuss in greater detail next week, but if you and I as the children of God work together, what can we not accomplish? With God, all things, of course, are possible. Now, in closing the sermon, I do want to give you two more thoughts two more thoughts that we won't spend too much time on from the book of Nehemiah in regards to building this wall and having, of course, this zeal for the work. Because if we have work to do, we need to be looking around and asking ourselves, are there certain work killers, if you will? Are there certain things that are going to kill my zeal, if you will, for the work? And I believe that Nehemiah addresses just a couple of those things. The first thing I want us to consider is zealous workers must avoid apathy. What had taken place in Jerusalem over the last 90 years before Nehemiah got there? Apathy. What is apathy? Apathy is a lack of enthusiasm. Apathy is a lack of interest, a lack of concern. And have you ever noticed that for you yourself, the further and further you get away from a situation, the further and further you get away from a task at hand, the easier it is to forget about? That's probably what's taking place right here in Jerusalem at this time, in Nehemiah's time. Here is a wall that needs to be built. The people in Jerusalem can look out and they can see that the wall is down in a rubble heap, that all the gates are burned down in ash. They know that the wall needs to be built, but what were some of the things that probably went in the minds of the people? I know that wall needs to be built up, but someone will get to it someday. I know that wall needs to get up, but that's really not my job. I know that wall needs to be built, but I have no time to build that wall, and no one was taking responsibility. I want to ask myself a question, and I want you to ask yourself the same question. Are there bridges that you know need to be built that you have not built? I looked this up yesterday. How many people die in the world on a daily basis? And what I found was 151,600 people die on a daily basis. And if you and I are honest with ourselves, we start asking the question, where is the majority of those 151,600 people going? And we know the answer. We know, of course, that the answer is torment, that they're going to torment. I'm mindful of Luke chapter 16. You remember, of course, the story, the account that Jesus tells there in Luke chapter 16 of the rich man and Lazarus. And, there might be some question as to, is this a parable or not? I don't personally believe that Luke chapter 16 is a parable. Luke didn't say it was a parable. Jesus calls a man by his first name. I believe this is a true story. And what happens after these two men die? One goes into Abraham's bosom, and he's comforted there. Lazarus does. But the rich man, he goes to torment. They're both in this Hadean realm. They're both waiting for that day of judgment, but one is in comfort and one is in torment. And that rich man, what is his main physical request for himself? He just wants a drop of water on his tongue. And this particular point was brought to my attention just recently. If we can believe that this is indeed a true account that Jesus was telling, that Jesus was saying, and that happened, let's say, maybe 2,000 years ago around the time of Jesus Christ, where is that rich man right now as we speak here in August 2017? Where is that rich man? He's still in torment. He's still wanting nothing but just a drop of water on his tongue to cool the heat. I don't want to go there, and I don't want any of those 151,600 people to go there. We don't want anyone in, of course, Corsicana to go there. There is work to be done. We need to make sure that we are not apathetic towards the work because souls are dying daily. Your children are growing. Are we building bridges for them? Do they know what the truth is? Do they know what they believe? They will be gone. They will be in their own homes. They will be in college one of these days. It is not time to be apathetic. It's instead time to be zealous for the good work. A zealous killer is apathy. Number 2, and finally this morning, zealous workers must avoid disunity. I appreciate the class that was taught this morning on 2 Corinthians, and the 1 Corinthians was brought up in the disunity that was taking place there in Corinth at the time. But have you ever noticed that whenever people can't get along together, what happens? Work stops. I want you to look over at chapter 3 of Nehemiah. Chapter 3, and as you're reading through Nehemiah this week, and you're reading through Nehemiah chapter 3, I realize that there's this urge, if you will, to kind of skim over some of these details because it kind of seems like a genealogy, and genealogies, they can be boring, right? But don't do that. Read through these, and we're not going to spend the time to read through all of them right now, but I do want to just bring out just a couple of them. And as you're going through this week, understand that from verse 1 all the way through the end of the chapter, what Nehemiah is doing is he's describing the work that's being done around the city in a counterclockwise motion. Okay, so you start here in verse 1, and all the way at the last verse, it's going to come back around to where they started in verse 1 in this counterclockwise motion. But notice some of the people that are working and how they're working together. Look at verse 1. Then Eliashib, the high priest, arose with his brothers the priests and built the sheep gate. They consecrated it and hung its doors. They consecrated the wall of the Tower of the 100 and the Tower of the Hanel. I kind of find this significant because here is the high priest, and what is his concern as he is working? He's working together, but his concern is making sure that that gate that the sheep come in that he's going to slaughter is taken care of. We find in verse 20, we don't have time to read it, but in verse 20, that his house is built on the wall as well. I'm putting myself in his shoes. If my house was on that wall, I'm going to want to make sure that that particular portion of the wall is strong, is built. So please give me that particular part of the wall. Eliashib, though, rather wanted to work together with the priests, and he wanted to work where, of course, those sheep are going to come in. A different man took care of his wall, and that is a man by the name of Maruk. Verse 24 says that a man by the name of Azariah, he built part of the wall, and his house was near that part of the wall. Nothing wrong with taking care of your own home, but we're all working together. In verse 2, we see that the men of Jericho, individuals who are outside of Jerusalem, they're coming in to help. In verse 5, we see that men from Tekoa come. And I find it interesting that these men are going against the wishes of their nobles. They are in persecution, if you will, based on the people above them because they don't want them there building, but they're going to build and they are going to build hard. Verse 4 tells us that a man was building the refuse gate. Sometimes work is dirty, but it needs to be done. This is the point I want us to bring here from chapter 3. Sometimes working together does not mean that we're all doing the same job, but that we're all working together for the same purpose. Their purpose was build that wall, and they were going to do whatever they had to do to make sure that that wall was built. Our purpose is, of course, to build those bridges. We're all going to have different contacts. We're all going to have different places. We're all going to do it in different ways, but we work, and we support each other, and we help each other. We do it together. You might be thinking, who is this preacher? He's coming in and assuming that we have apathy and disunity problems here at Westhill. That's not my intention whatsoever. My intention, rather, is for us to look at Nehemiah over the next several weeks and to determine in ourselves, let's work, and let's work together, and let's have this zeal to work together. How is your life holding out? Maybe you have some apathy in your life in regards to the outside world, and you want some encouragement. You want some prayers that we can help you in pushing yourself to have that zeal. Maybe you have apathy in your own spiritual life. Change that today. Maybe you've had some disunity with a brother or sister in Christ, and you want to reunite with them. Do that later today. Go find that individual and make yourself right with that individual. Strive to work together so that we can indeed work and build these bridges here in Corsicana and around the rest of the world together. If there's an individual here who has never yet put on Christ in baptism, we of course know what Jesus Christ has done for us. He has paid the price. He has paid it all. And now all he asks is for us to obey him, to, of course, confess him for the rest of our life, to repent, change our ways, turn away from the sin of our past, and to be baptized for the forgiveness of sins. If you're ready to do that today, if there's anything we can do in helping you today, please come forward as together we stand and sing.
Have you been to Jesus for the cleansing power? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you fully trusting in his grace this hour? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb?